Hi everybody, it's Catherine and I am here today with Claire, and we are back for another A Song of Ice and Fire reread discussion. We're still on Game of Thrones, but I think by the end of today we're almost halfway through. So we're reading from Eddard 5, which is chapter 25, all the way to Arya 3, which is chapter 32. And I think this is the longest amount that we've done so far. I think this was the biggest chunk that we've done so far. So yeah, it was we'll get into it anyway. We actually have 3 Ed chapters, and that's where we're going to be starting with Ed. So Claire, hello, and yeah, so Ed, this chapter, I felt Ed's chapters were the longest of the chapters. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but a lot happens in this chapter. He meets with Pycelle, then he has a conversation with Arya, and then he meets with Littlefinger again at the end of this chapter. So was there anything that you picked up in this chapter in particular?
Yeah, well, I would agree that Ned's chapters definitely felt longer, especially the last chapter of this chunk that we're looking at today. It just felt as though it went on and on and on for hours. And it's interesting you say we're about halfway through, because I'm actually listening to a YouTube audio version, so I've got no idea really like physically where we are in the book. So it's good to know that we're about halfway through. Yeah, I thought just going back to the kind of experience generally of the whole series, and just some observations about the pacing and the chapter placement kind of thing. But I do think that it is really interesting, and this is what I think grabs my attention and gives me the enjoyment of the book, is there really are, from the aspect of the point of view, there are like mini sagas within each of the point of views in different locations, and everything's developing at a different pace. And you can really see with these 2 chapters here, actually, so we've got a Ned chapter and then next a Jon chapter. With this Ned chapter, everything seems to be taking place within the course of like a day, so 24 hours. Yeah. Whereas the next chapter with Jon and Sam, when he meets Sam, that seems to sort of span across maybe weeks, even months. But it's still, that seems to add to my enjoyment of the story. So if you get a little bit like, because I used to pick up the books and be like, oh, it's a, I don't know, Daenerys chapter, or oh, it's a, you know, and you'd kind of like, I feel as though this is a bit of a chore. Whereas sometimes I'd curl up with like, oh, it's a Sansa chapter or a Tyrion chapter, and I would want to read that more. So it's a very good way of kind of keeping you going and keeping the enjoyment of the read in general going. But just specific to this, that was a very big long introduction.
Well, actually, just as you're saying that though, this is our first time not having a Dany chapter. You just said it there, and I realized actually we haven't seen Dany this chapter.
That's
just
true.
Talking about the last time we saw her, she's pregnant, and that was way before a lot of the events that we've read in Westeros have happened. So that's kind of her timeline is in the back. It's back before a lot of what happens here.
Yes.
But we're going to jump forward a lot in her pregnancy as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's, but again, none of that really diminishes the enjoyment and the pacing of the story. It's not something that's like confusing to me to the extent where I don't enjoy what's going on. Yeah, so again, just picking up on the kind of facts and the story development and the character development, it's interesting to know that Pycelle has been there for such a long time. And I knew that. I kind of knew that he'd been Grand Maester Pycelle, you know, and he was at the Red Keep. And I knew that he'd been there for a long time and through, you know, serving like 4 different kings. But just actually coming out and saying and reading 40 years that he'd been there, that is a massive part of anybody's life, anybody's lifespan. And that just fascinated me, that he had been there for such a long time and served through so many kings. And it immediately just makes you question, well, I wonder what his motivations really could be. And that kind of links back to questions about Varys that the reader has as well, about loyalty to the realm. Nobody seems to be really telling Ned much at the moment, or if they are, they're telling him half-baked bits of things. So nobody's really laying out, oh, right, okay, this is what I think happened, and these are the suspicions that I had, and I think it could be, you know, Pycelle just brushes under the carpet that Jon Arryn just obviously must have died of some kind of sudden illness. So either he's a really crappy Maester, considering he's been there 40 years as Grand Maester, or there's a different story, or he's implicated in something that he doesn't want to Ned know about, for example. You know, we've got a couple of iconic quotes in this chapter. The seed is strong, which again can be interpreted lots and lots of different ways. We know that Jon Arryn was obviously trying to tell Robert something. Really, this whole conversation that he has with Pycelle, again illustrated to me within the scene, Ned's drinking sweetened milk because it's hot. He's boiling, and it's a relief for him to have this cool drink. And he notices that it is a little bit too sweet for his taste, and it just made me think that's in there to illustrate how easy it is to poison somebody. Yeah. Within this whole, you know, within the story, and the fact that he kind of questions, it's a little bit too sweet for me, because, like, would you be able to really know if you'd been poisoned or not? Would you kind of think to yourself, this is a little bit too sweet for my taste, or it tastes not, it doesn't, there's something not quite, but you'd still drink it?
Also, milk isn't the best thing to drink in the heat.
Yeah.
So, like, but it is a good thing to hide a poison in.
Yes,
for sure.
Yeah,
and it makes you instantly suspicious of Pycelle.
Yes, yeah. So there's this kind of like, oh, you know, poison, and also Ned's just drank something that tasted slightly funny to him. So is poison a woman's weapon? Maybe not. I thought that, so already in terms of this mystery, we know that Cersei was on her way to, so she's kind of got an alibi because she was on her way to Casterly Rock at the time. So she's kind of out of the frame, I guess, for when this actually took place, when the poisoning took place, or when this sudden illness happened with Jon Arryn. I mean, I didn't really get a great deal more out of that conversation with Ned with Pycelle, apart from the fact that yes, you are immediately suspicious of him. What do you think?
Yeah, no, sorry, I was reading Cedric's comment that, hi Cedric, that sweet milk is very cooling, and the recipe for the cookbook is great with the warm weather. So that's interesting. I suppose it could be like a milkshake, I guess. But well, I don't know. It just
when you've had a curry, you're supposed to drink
that's true.
Milky drinks, or when you've been eating too much chili. Yeah,
for me, I found that this the other memorable line is "Dark wings, dark words" from this chapter. The other thing I thought was interesting was Ned wonders who Pycelle serves, and I feel that's a question we're often asking with Pycelle throughout the series. But this kind of starts, well, it started with Littlefinger and Kat's chapter last week, but people shifting the blame or trying to put the blame on the other people. So here he says that poison is a woman's, or Ned says poison is a woman's weapon, and Pycelle it's a craven's and a eunuch's. So, and he allows it to trail off and hang in the air as if to say, we all know a eunuch in our midst. So, it started with Littlefinger trying to put the blame on Tyrion, goes to Pycelle, trying to put the blame on Varys. Varys tries to put the blame on other people later on, and Tyrion comes back to put the blame on Littlefinger. It's just this cycle. But I feel all the time, it seems so obvious looking back, and of course that's, we're the readers, so of course it's going to be obvious to us. But there's so many, especially when we get to the tourney, there's so many pieces of the jigsaw that seems so evident to Ned at this point. I also, something I never really paid attention to much is the Arya scene in this chapter, but I paid more attention to it this time when she's practicing her water dancing on the stairs, and he says to her, do you have to stand there? It's a long way down. And it kind of foreshadows the fact that Arya is always going to take the difficult way. She's always going to face the difficult thing. She's, you know, and we get a hint that Sansa will also learn to do that later on with the Hound. She won't like it, but she'll learn to face the truth as well eventually. And also just that he holds a vigil with the two girls in the Godswood for Bran in Thanksgiving for him being saved. And they both dream, or Sansa dreams of Bran anyway, but he remarks that they lie, the dark red blooms of dragon's breath surround the girls. And I kind of wondered, is that symbolic of the protection they'll get from dragon's breath, or the danger they'll be in from dragon's breath, actual dragon's breath, not just a plant or whatever. And again, leading on from the Bran chapter that we just had last week, we also get mentioned with aligning Bran with Bran the Builder here.
Yes. Yeah.
Which, again, I don't know, it's not until you're actually now reading them in chunks like this, and I'm trying to follow what can I pick up from chapter to chapter, because there is a method in the order. So so
again, it makes you question whether or not there is a connection between all of the Brans. Is it the same person? Is it because you're right, you know, Ned refers to Bran being like Bran the Builder but not a knight, and you know, other Brandons he mentions as well.
And we're going to have a lot of dreams as well. And so Sansa dreams of Bran here, and then in the next chapter Jon has dreams, but also him and Sam listen to the wind for a while, and it all makes me think of Bran the whole way. Like, it's just like and later on in Kat's chapter something happens, which I will get to later on with Kat, that it's now making me think about Bran and his potential powers later on, and looking at this, trying to see, is there any more of Bran that we can find, or any kind of. But yeah, no, that was it for me. I Littlefinger telling him that the wise thing he ever did was not trusting him. That's in this chapter as well, right? That was the only other thing that
I mean, you know, everybody's pointing out at this stage that there's, you know, like the wheels within wheels and plots within plots, and like you say, somebody's always ready to blame somebody else, and no, you don't really know what's going on. There's just this uncomfortable feeling of foreboding on behalf of Ned. I mean, obviously, Littlefinger probably turned up there very timely, because he already knew, you know, the spies everywhere, that Ned had just been to speak to Pycelle. So it's like, you know, that's probably why he turned up to talk to Ned, to see if he could get some information out of him. But it just, I did wonder about why Littlefinger seemed to, he really kind of like was talking down about Barristan, which made me, and trying to influence Ned about Barristan. And it's like, I wonder if why would Littlefinger, if and why would he want to be getting rid of Barristan?
Yeah. And Varys does that later as well.
Yeah, there's, you know, I suppose everybody is trying to, it's kind of like, you know, he comes into King's Landing, he's green as grass, doesn't understand about all this kind of court, you know, politic that's going on around the small council, and with the lords and the ladies in the Red Keep. And he's green as grass, but he's got this enormous position of power. So everybody's going to be trying to influence him at the moment. And that's, you know, probably one of the most honest things that Littlefinger has said, maybe ever, pointing out that it's not wise to trust him.
And he is getting, like, as you said, like, his story is happening over a much shorter period of time compared to the other characters. he is getting an awful lot of information thrown at him. And he's in a strange place where he has to get to know politics and things like that. And like we have this, it's funny because I was talking to one of my friends the other night about this, you know, this very emotional ripping of his friendship with Robert. It's like this tearing apart that Robert isn't the man he knew, and that's like a heartbreak in and of itself. Like when you have to break up with your friends, and he doesn't want to do it, but it's kind of like you're kind of saying, you know, as a friend of mine would say, you need to cut the fat in your life. Even like, and literally with Robert, he needs to cut the fat and get back to Winterfell, because this isn't going to work. It's really not going to work. And I find myself scream at the page going, why are you doing this? It's not worth it. And even John Arryn, he says John Arryn wasn't the friendliest of guys later on. It's like, why are you doing this? Why, like, at this stage, why do you even care who killed John Arryn? All you need to know is that it's not good news, and I don't think you can help it at this stage. I don't know. But Cedric just said, just with Bran, when we mentioned Bran with I nearly said Bob the Builder. Bran the Builder. Can we fix it? Yes, we can. Old Nan often forgets which Bran she's talking to. This doesn't happen with the other children. It's not mentioned anyway. That's a good point, actually. So that we did discuss that last week, how the Bran characters kind of mix up. But yeah, that's Eddard 5. I think the other Ed chapters probably yield a little bit more in terms of the mystery. So then we move on to chapter 26, which is Jon 4. And I know this is a nice chapter for you because Sam arrives in this chapter. Yeah. And it's definitely one of those chapters that you know that Sam's going to be an important character because he spends pages describing him and his background. And Sam, again, is one of those rare characters in Game of Thrones, in a Game of Thrones, that we'll get a POV from him later, but that how other people see him is how he is. There aren't any pretenses with him. I feel Tyrion is that way in a sense as well, but Sam even more so. I think he's definitely the kind of person that I'd also say Davos is like that. That they're kind of these characters that they are honest with themselves. And Sam, just my heart breaks for me for him when I'm reading this chapter. There's a couple of memorable quotes here for me, just to do with foreshadowing Jon and what's going to come up with Jon later on, and maybe things that we haven't even seen yet. So one of the things that Torrhen says to him is, the bastards speak and the peasants tremble, which made me think of Jon, and who, if he is back in Winds of Winter, what kind of Jon will he be? Will he be like the benevolent character that we've known now, or will he be a bit colder? Will he be a bit more of a frightening kind of leader? Will peasants tremble when they see Jon later? That just made me think, if he does end up bleeding and thing. He notes that there's courage in Sam's owning of cowardice, which this is another thing that we get a lot of talk of actually throughout this chunk. A lot of talk about people being craven and bravery and that kind of thing. We do get a bit of that as well with the Sansa chapter and Tyrion's chapter too. And then his dream, which I think is probably, for me, one of the more important dreams that we've come across so far, with the exception of Bran. He dreams of being in an empty castle and he's searching for someone, and most nights it's his father. He doesn't say, obviously, Ned. So, you know, everybody likes to jump on that for the R+L=J. And then Sam says, do you ever find anyone in your dream? And he says, no one, which made me think, is that Arya, obviously? And he says he's afraid of what's waiting for me, what might be waiting for me. I'm not a Stark, and there's a bit more there, but he says I have to go anyway, which this is in the crypts, when he's waiting for the crypts, and he's worried about the old Stark kings down in the crypts. And this is followed shortly after with the other guys picking on Sam and telling him that they're basically going to beat the shit out of him the next time they train. And Jon whispers something in their ear, some kind of threat, but he doesn't say what it is. And they instantly all agree to not do it, apart from Rast, right?
Yeah.
And it just made me watch, what's this kind of hidden menace in Jon? This ability to instantly quieten people. And it just made me think of that line, the bastards speak and the presence tremble. And it's just like, what is it? Because he doesn't necessarily give that away when he's in his own mind or anything like that. So what is that menace and threat that he's able to communicate to others? Because we don't really...
I think it could be something. I think it could also just be, my direwolf will rip your throat out. And that's like, whoa, okay, fine, whatever you say, mate.
Yeah.
Because he does use that tactic with Rast, you know.
Yes, that's true.
So it could be something as simple as that, like, you know, just in case you hadn't noticed, I've got a massive direwolf here that could do you some pretty good damage. So leave this kid alone because you're all bullying him.
So it is kind of funny that, like, probably the most able fighter of the Stark children probably relies on his direwolf the most in the way.
Yeah. Well, particularly in these types of, like, you know, bro sort of situations.
Yeah.
But I think just going back through some of the things that you said and my observations of this chapter, obviously we can tell straight away that Alistair Thorne is a twat, and that he remains that way throughout the story as far as I'm concerned. I think that what comes out of this for me with Sam is his bravery, not his cowardice. And there are a couple of things, like a couple of quotes here. Alistair Thorne says, John remembers the Winterfell Master at Arms saying to him, "Know your foe." And I just thought that's quite interesting, because we've just had Ned's chapter where he knows that there is this nest of vipers, but he doesn't really kind of know who his foe is at this point. And Sam introducing himself and talking about his background, whether or not, what he said, he used to be his heir, he used to be the heir of Lord Tarly, makes me think, does that mean ultimately at the very end of this tale, will Sam inherit Hornhill? Because he said he used to be the heir. And when he's describing himself, the thing that really jumped out at me that I've got a big star against is, I fear I'm a coward, not I am a coward. You know, he didn't like, I can't deal with this because I'm a coward. He fears that he's a coward, which means it's because he's been told that, obviously, all his life. But he's not, he's very brave. And we get Jon reflecting on that, thinking about how brave it was Sam just to even say out loud that he was craven, and even having that the balls really to be able to say something like that. I made a note of this. I don't know whether it's relevant or not, but Sam saying that the first time he ever saw snow was in the Barrowlands. And that just makes me think about snow, bastards, king of winter, that, you know, somebody who may be a snow that isn't a snow. And yeah, I like the like Ghost making Sam laugh and just making him feel at ease, I thought was really sweet. I did think in Jon's dreams that it was interesting that even though he felt he shouldn't be there because he didn't feel that he was a Stark, that he wasn't afraid of the Kings of Winter, which are these gruesome, grisly characters with this really kind of dark history. he should have been quite afraid of them. When he got to that point in his dream, I would have thought that, like, whoa, and he wakes up, because it's a scary thing. But he notices that they're there, and he's not afraid of them at all. Which makes me think that possibly he could end up being a king of winter rather than king of the, king of Westeros.
Yeah, well, there is like a hostility that we've talked about before with the Starks. Like, and we've talked about how the history of the Starks isn't necessarily these cuddly Starks that we have in our heads. That there is a brutality to the Starks, and even Benjen showed that a little bit at the Wall. And Jon is starting to show it at the end of the chapter, which I think is why I was thinking about him whispering threats as being maybe a callback to that in his nature as well. Because later on with Ed, there's a certain coldness about the way Ed treats Arya when she comes to him with her story. And yeah, it's there's something I like the way Sam I think Sam is good for Jon. I think Sam softens Jon in a lot of ways. I think Jon would have become very, very cold and very much like Benjen. And even though he admits at the end that Benjen is right, I think but for Sam, we'd have a very different Jon. I think it's really important that he has a friend and an ally there. And it's not a friend, it's a brother to him. And their resignation in who they are, as who they've been told they are all their lives, and who they'll actually end up being, I think is what's bringing them together right now. And they'll grow as individuals with one another. And it's going to be a relationship of the ages. I don't know if I don't think Jon will, at the end, he may have a more important relationship, but I think at the end of this series, the Sam and Jon's relationship will be central. I mean, one of the biggest influences on this series is Lord of the Rings. So we've got a very important friendship at the center of that book as well. And I don't think we should overlook Jon and Sam's relationship here. I think it's very important in who they are.
No, absolutely. And I think perhaps the beginning of it is forged from Jon actually, maybe Sam reminds him of his brothers, of his younger brothers. Like at the very end of the chapter, he says, we're not friends, we're brothers. And, Sam is crying. He seems defenseless. He feels that he needs to protect him. And when Sam is telling Jon about the backstory about how he came to the Wall, and he describes what he was like because this all happened, from what I could tell, this all seemed to happen before, when he was quite young. The other brother came along when Sam was like 3, and at the age of 3, his father had already decided it's not good enough. And he grew up to sort of appreciate the things that, like, the softer kind of things in life, rather than feeling that he was capable of being a warrior. And it's pointed out that even though he's talking about these things, he doesn't cry. But I've made a note here that little Sam, like when he's describing what he was like as a small boy, little Sam to me sounded a little bit like Tommen. That kind of innocence and appreciation of the kind of softer, maybe more feminine kind of things in life. Doesn't necessarily mean that neither of them are going to be capable, but just not in the kind of traditional sense, perhaps. But I think that would have, for Jon, would have reminded him of that brotherly bond, because he misses them and he thinks about his siblings, he thinks about Bran, and he worries about Bran, about what's happened to Bran and what will happen to his brothers. Even though he's at the Wall, he still has these kind of feelings, not just about Arya, but about his brothers as well. And I think that this has helped massively to forge this we're not friends, we're brothers relationship that I completely agree will be central throughout the rest of this story. But I think it comes from him. It's that kind of unconscious bias of, you remind me so much of my poor, younger, defenseless, disabled brother that, I feel that I have to be the one to protect you and protect you from everybody else who can do you harm as well, which is you know, this was, I love this chapter.
Yeah, and there's actually something else in this chapter that's really important. It's sandwiched between two Ed chapters, and as he's going in his dream looking for someone, and most of the time it's his father, we also think about Rhaegar when we meet Sam, because one thing about Rhaegar is that we find out later is that Rhaegar loved music and songs and harps, and actually again in this chunk of chapters that comes up a few times, how music and fighting don't go together, but actually Rhaegar proves that they do. So maybe there's some sort of an intuitive response to Sam based on who his father might actually be. And his father actually embodied those two things, sensitivity and being a great warrior. And maybe Sam does as well. So it's interesting that it is sandwiched between these two Ed chapters, although in saying that, we have a lot of Ed chapters coming up, so someone was going to get sandwiched anyway.
Yes. That's kind of all, that's all I had really on that chapter.
So then we're into, as I said, another Ed chapter. And this opens with Ed talking about the tourney again. So what did you have for Ed 6, this chapter 27?
Not a great deal, so I'll go through it quite quickly. So this is where Ned visits the armourer, Tobo Mott. Is that right? Later on in this chapter?
This is, yes, it is, yes. Yeah.
So I thought that it was a bit of a silly move of Ned to weaken his own household guard by 20. We hear later on when Arya says how many men are protecting my father, and one of his guards says 50, he's got 50 men, and it's like, is that 50 now that you've let 20 of them go to the city watch to manage the masses for this stupid tourney? I just thought that was a really stupid move of Ned, considering that there is all this kind of mystery and intrigue and nest of vipers and you don't know who to trust. He needn't have done that. He needn't have weakened his own household guard. He could have got the men from somewhere else.
Especially when he insists that they don't call it the Hands tourney. So why are you taking on the responsibility? If it should be the King's tourney, let it be the King's tourney.
Yeah.
Let the people will blame the king for the unrest.
Yeah, that's true. I just thought it was really silly. It was really silly, and yet another naive, green as grass kind of move by Ned. Interesting that this is where Stannis is introduced into the story. I think this might be the first time that Stannis is mentioned. And he's mentioned, again, I think we've got to think about how characters who are questionable are introduced into the story. And this character is introduced by his brother. So, and he immediately comes across as like mean, harsh, unyielding, kind of brutish sort of a man. But I just completely believe that this is Renly's point of view, again, influencing us as readers. I'm like, as we go on, you will begin to realise that I am actually quite a Stannis fan.
Me too.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, we're given these little breadcrumbs that we just eat up as readers that are coming from somebody else's perspective, and in this case, it's bloody Renly who introduces the concept of Stannis.
I think he's been mentioned by name a couple of times, but you're right, not in the amount. Like, we get such a description of Stannis that actually holds up to be true when we do meet the guy.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. But again, it's very kind of negative.
But again, accurate.
Accurate, yeah. That's true. That is true. I think that later on, it's, you know, I just think it's, again, Ned doesn't seem to be able to see that he's being set up. He doesn't seem to see that all these little leads that Littlefinger are giving him about Jon Arryn just are useless, and are sending him on a bit of a wild goose chase. I think I agree with what you said previously in previous discussions that we've had about why does Ned not just demand that Stannis comes back?
Yeah.
And he has this very vague notion of not yet, because I mean, he does consider it. He does consider calling Stannis back, but it's like, well, no, not yet, because I haven't got the measure of this yet, or I haven't got the measure of that yet. And it's like, well, bring Stannis back and ask him and find out, you know, why are you putting yourself through this? I just thought it was a bit strange. And it again just highlights how completely out of his depth Ned is in this kind of situation. So he's just, and at that elevated high position, he's just ripe for everybody to be. I mean, I'm surprised he's not dead already, to be honest.
Me too. He's so blinkered, like he's so, it's Cersei, it has to be Cersei, it's Cersei, it's Cersei. Like, it's just, if he hadn't, he's so blinded by his hate for Cersei that he's missing the big picture. Yeah,
completely. I thought that it was, you know, it was quite obvious that Renly's up to something, showing the photograph, the picture of, or the painting or whatever, of Marjorie. I think that, and then just at the very end, we get Ned figuring out by visiting the armourer that Renly is the king's bastard. Interesting that Renly describes his mother as having yellow hair, which again makes me think about Cersei. Was Cersei actually, is he Cersei and Ned's? And
I've
Robert's
always liked that
theory. Yeah, it just seems plausible. Peculiar. Yeah, and also I think there may, I don't know, there's something about that later on, the conversation that Arya overhears, but we'll get to it.
Yeah.
Worth pointing out again, obviously, that the door to Tobo Mott's is a black and white door. He claims to be able to forge Valyrian steel, which is that must be something that nobody else seems to be able to do, but he can do that. So it's like, what is it about this Tobo Mott?
It's Ed that's here in this, he just, anything that's any vaguely like magical at all, he just dismisses.
It just, so he could be somebody quite significant, or putting the clues together, he's got this skill to be able to forge Valyrian steel, and he's got this black and white door. Immediately doesn't sound like somebody who was just like brought up in Flea Bottom and, you know, rose up from.
It's also made of weirwood.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I think the only thing the other thing that I've pointed out is, up until this point, I know we do get it a little bit later on in this series of chapters, but so far, considering we're almost halfway, Ned seems to have been at King's Landing for quite a while, but he doesn't seem to have spent, in fact, I've put in my notes here, Ned seems to spend zero time with Robert, even just to update him on like general matters of the realm. It's like they don't seem to be sort of connecting as the king and the hand. And I don't know, I just had a question about that. I thought that was a bit strange.
I don't think anyone spends much time with Robert. I think he's quite lonely. And he's a terrible king, but he'll admit it almost if you listen to him. And I wish Ned would just, I think you're totally right. Like, don't bother going to the small council. Just stick with Robert. Have his ear instead.
Yeah, I mean, I've this is much later on in Sansa's chapter, but I made a note that as readers, the view that we get of King Robert is very unclear. We just see things from a distance. In this case, we see through Sansa's eyes him arguing with the Queen, but it's hard for us to know what Robert is really like at this stage, beyond the kind of parody of him that you get through other people's points of views. So it's and even Ned doesn't get really that close, but I mean, it does develop a little bit as we go on, but I just thought it was amazing at this stage that we still don't really have a clear view of what their relationship really is. And
I mean, I was very interested in the Stannis thing, and the Renly potential plot where he seems to be setting up Marjorie Tyrell as Lyanna 2.0 to replace Cersei. Again, the focus is on getting rid of the Lannisters, and I don't necessarily think that's the big picture. And the more I read, the more I think Jon Arryn and Stannis were planning some sort of mini coup almost of the throne, not just to get rid of the Lannisters, but potentially to get rid of Robert. And the reason I say this is because they spend so much time together, and I already suggested that Jon Arryn knew about Jon Snow. I think he knows who Jon Snow is the whole time. I don't think he's told. He definitely didn't tell Stannis that. I'm sure of it. But I definitely think Stannis and Jon Arryn were planning to try and take back the throne. Like Robert, to me, sounds like he's very unhealthy and not necessarily long for the world anyway. But Jon Arryn was planning to send his son to Dragonstone. And I wonder, was there a plot there for him to eventually have that son marry Shireen? Because then who's next in line to the throne? Stannis.
Yeah.
And that would put his grandsons on the throne. So just we also don't get a very clear picture of who Jon Arryn is. Like, what kind of a guy was he? How nice was this guy? We learn in this chapter that he's not that friendly. So and you know, Ned's judgment on what makes a good person doesn't start with, like, you know, how nice they are or friendly or anything like that. It starts with like how honorable you are and all that kind of thing. So, and to live up in the Vale, you've got to be kind of a bit of a cold fish, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just one of those things I think Ned is biased to, because he doesn't like Renly and because he doesn't like the Lannisters. He's missing all these clues that Jon and Stannis were up to something much bigger than, and we never really get to find out what that is. But I think the idea that Stannis could take the throne is planted a long time ago. Stannis is prepping for that well before we get to Clash, well before anything is revealed, well before he even figures out that Robert's kids aren't his own. I think they're planning that a long time.
So do you think that there's a separate plan?
Yes, I do. I think there was a separate plan.
With Renly and Littlefinger.
Yes, I think I think he was being challenged on both sides. Because listen, if Robert isn't around, it's possible that 3 different groups of people are trying to. I mean, we already have Littlefinger, Varys, Pycelle at odds, so it's possible that we got Lannisters, Renly, Tyrell, and then the Arryn, Stannis kind of plan as well, because they're all seeing an opportunity here to take over. And the only one who seems to be missing it is Ned, and he's so fixated on Jon Arryn's death and on Cersei being awful that he's missing. He's also missing out on the whole Lysa story, the Lysa angle.
Yes,
I mean, send somebody for Lysa, or go and talk to her, or send Jory to talk to her. Send like you just because she's in the Vale doesn't mean you can't get information.
Yeah, exactly.
Send a Raven.
He's been very.
Can you send me a reply?
He's been very naive, and he's not utilising the resources that actually he could demand to use in the position that he's in, but he doesn't. But then again, he can't even control his wife. So
no, but I did like the way he went into the armors as if he was going into the dragon's mouth. Just as you mentioned, Kat, he yearns for Kat in this chapter, and to hear Rob and Jon sword fighting in the yard. But again, poor Rickon and Bran, especially Rickon. That kid, like, why did they even have him? But that's Ed, Jon, and Ed. Now we're moving into Kat. And I forgot to say at the beginning, if you have any questions, just ask in the chat. Cedric's there and saying that to jump forward to the words "kill the boy and let the man be born" show how capable he is of that coldness. That's from Jon. So I missed that when we were talking about Jon. So that is very true about Jon. And I do think there is a coldness there with Ed, that his inability to see other people's motives is holding him back. And
Barristan, he says Barristan describes as stupid brave, but not a tactician. So Varys and Littlefinger are the kind of people that would despise that as stupidity. So it's only logical for them to be rude. I agree, but I think there is something later on with Varys where he seems to be defending Barristan. It was just Barristan in particular, rather than kind of loyal people who would be seen as being a bit stupid, for the likes of Littlefinger and Varys. But I just thought, is there something about Barristan where they're kind of fighting over him? Somebody wants him removed, well, because of a particular reason, and somebody else wants him to stay.
He may not politically be a tactician, but on the military front, he's excellent.
Yes. Yeah.
The Barristan we come to know may be one of the most important military advisors and commanders in the whole series. So that makes him dangerous, because not having Barristan there puts Robert at a big disadvantage, especially if someone is going to mount a campaign against him from Dragonstone, from Highgarden, from Casterly Rock. Robert is in a very, very, very dangerous situation, and I don't even think there's anything. I think the best thing that could happen for Ned now is not to even solve any of that, but just to realize that Robert is he's getting it from all angles. I don't think there's any way to get out of that. No. And I think Ned should go back and secure the North as quickly as possible. And even we get this sense at the beginning of this chapter that we have winter's coming, winter's dangerous, winter is horrible. But actually, in the height of this late summer heat, the city is going into meltdown. People are losing their minds and ripping each other apart. And we've got an increase in violence and rape and attacks and all that kind of thing. And so it's not a good place to be in the summer either, in King's Landing. So get yourself back north. That's straight away.
I think there's been a couple of mentions so far about people losing their heads. There's the woman's head in the rainbow pool or whatever in the
rainbow, the Renly's thing, is it?
No, it was when Janice Slint is describing the hysteria and the masses and trying to control them, and there was some headless, a woman's head found in the rainbow pool at the Sept of Baelor or something like that, and there's also another mention of somebody losing their head or somebody being beheaded or something. There's been a couple of things so far that are kind of like, whoa.
Ned, get out of there.
Get out of there, Ned. Now run back up the King's Road, back up to Winterfell.
And Cedric says the smith is from Qohora and they are able to reforge Valyrian steel, not make new steel. Yeah, so it's still interesting though, because the potential is that smiths in that area know that skill. So that's something that could be passed to Gendry, hopefully. All right, so we move on to Cat 5, and man, this chapter. Ooh, Cat 5. This is one of those chapters that it becomes more confusing the more you read it, I feel.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want me to go through mine?
I'll go first if you're in the middle. Are you're painting?
Yeah, I'm just doing a second coat on this.
The reason I say it gets more confusing is Cat, and I've talked about this all the way from Cat 1 to 4, that she's very honest in how she thinks. She doesn't mince her words. She's not that nice about people if she doesn't want. She very, very clearly explains her actions. And when it comes to the most pivotal moment in the series so far, we don't get any explanation at all. Why did she just suddenly take him? Why does she decide that that's the best idea at that time? She doesn't explain her actions at all. Now, the one thing I will say is when I mentioned in the last 2 chapters, I think with Cat, definitely the last one, in Cat 3, that I think Cat is being whispered to. I think she is being manipulated psychically, if you like, or something like that, either by Bran or Blood Raven or something, the three-eyed raven, that I think that she is being manipulated, and her only thought prior to taking I mean, she thinks about who's aligned to her dad, but her only actual thought process that we see is when she said, when somebody offers Tyrion food and she says, I hope he chokes on it. And then it said, and then the next line is, she thought of Bran drowning and choking on his own blood. And it's like, that's why. Like, that, where did that even come from? That has nothing got to do with his fall. Nothing, like, why is that image suddenly in her head? And it made me wonder, is she manipulated into taking action there by an outside force? And she's so far from the north that maybe the whispers aren't that strong or something like that. But that image itself seems to propel her to make this monumental decision that I think most people agree plunges the entire continent into war. And it, for somebody who has been so thorough in explaining how she feels about things and why, we don't get any explanation here. And it's just so impetuous, and it is. I've just,
you know, but it just seems like a very flash decision. I've got just again all of these. Whenever you're in Kat's head, she's not thinking about the last 14-15 years that she's had with her family at Winterfell, like her life and her family. She doesn't think about that. She's constantly thinking, I know she's on the move and I know she's moving down south and there are going to be things that trigger and remind her, but she's constantly thinking about childhood memories and River Run again. And whenever she does think about the north, or she refers to the north, it's always complaining about it being rainy and icy in the weather, and and it's like, even, of course they were going to stop at that inn. Of course, her and what's he called? Roderick.
Roderick.
Yeah. Of course they were going to stop at the inn because it feeds into nostalgia about the past, and about the innkeep, and they were always going to stop there because it's like her vanity trip. She seems to be going back to revisit these childhood memories and feeding this nostalgia. When she's thinking about her, and she definitively, before Tyrion, I think this is before Tyrion even turns up, but she thinks about what's in the west, what's in the east, and what's in the north. And the west is River Run, so that's home. The east is the Vale of Arryn, where her sister is, and the north is where her sons and Duty are. So, and I've just made a note of her thinking that the north in her mind is her sons and her duty, which then makes me think, well, you've got such shitty thoughts about the north and complaining about Winterfell all the time. If the north is, I just think her mission is in the north, and it's not, she's been sent there. She's been sent there, and it's part of this family duty honor. Her duty, she feels, is in the north with her sons. So maybe it's just as simple as she was supplanted there by her father, Hoster. There definitely seems to be a kind of group, like a layer of that generation, like Hoster, Tywin, Ned's father. And I know that there are various different, I've not really gone into it, but this like southern ambitions and southern alliances, and like trying to strengthen their numbers and not rely on the areas that they traditionally, so like intermarrying and encouraging that. But it seems as though she had a definitive mission in the north, and it was her duty, and that's part of her family duty on her, because she only ever seems to think about herself and her family being the family that she grew up with, a brother and a sister and a father, and not the family that she's created with her husband in the north. She seems to have no fond memories of that at all. It's just a duty, and they are her sons. So it's just weird. There's just something about her that I think maybe she's just been manipulated from the minute she was born, from her family, and now potentially by, you know, a more of a mystical external force like the three-eyed raven. Who knows?
She makes it very difficult to defend her.
I don't like her. No. I don't like her at this stage at all. And I was always quite ambivalent towards Cat. I was like, you know, yeah, she's the maternal figure. Later on, when there are great losses for her, it's like, you know, it felt heartbreaking. But now, I'm going to be interested to read how all of this unfolds with Cat, because at the moment she seems quite cold, and her emotions don't seem to be in the place that you would expect them to be.
At the moment, we get so much foreshadowing here, and later on in Tyrion's chapter. It's actually hard to talk about this chapter without referencing Tyrion's chapter in a way, but so much foreshadowing for Lady Stoneheart. And like the whole way through, and it's like, how did I knew it was there, but it's so, like, it's really laid on thick. And like one of the first things Roderick says to her at the beginning of this chapter is, "You'll take a chill. Like, be careful, you'll take a chill." It's like the more she goes towards her Tully side, the colder she gets, which is kind of ironic considering that we've been talking about how the Starks are kind of cruel and brutal in a way. But I also really liked how there's so much Lady Stoneheart foreshadowing in this chapter. It kind of seals her fate in a way. How this decision kind of seals her fate. She puts herself on that journey towards being Stoneheart, and it's hard to see how she couldn't end up becoming Stoneheart. It's just like, there's no, like, she clearly isn't worried about her daughters still in Lannister hands. I mean, is she so naive that she thinks that Littlefinger is going to look after her? I mean, Tyrion pulls apart the Littlefinger and Frey loyalty within a couple of pages.
Hello. Oh, I don't know where Catherine's gone, but I'm going to move on to. Here she is. I was going to move on to the next chapter.
Okay, there we go. I'm sorry, did I cut off halfway through there talking?
Yeah.
Tyrion, did you? And how he later on he just pulls apart her trust in Littlefinger and the Freys in a couple of pages, and how she couldn't see that herself.
Yeah.
Like, again, she's very like Ned. In a way, they're a perfect couple. She refuses to see those that would do her harm, and like Ned, is very blinded by people she doesn't like, regardless of their motives or anything like that. But let's move on to the next chapter, which is Sansa 2, which is kind of like our fairy tale chapter, isn't it? This tourney chapter. Yeah, for me it reads like a fairy tale until you get to the horror story part at the end. But so this is, we get the tourney, the hands tourney, through Sansa, and the description of somebody like Jaime at the beginning of this chapter, I think it's just like, it's really rich world that you have, like the opulent dress and all that kind of thing, and lots of references to Royces, which I don't know. I don't really have any particular theory, except that she sees Jaime and thinks of Jon Royce, and the next page Jaime on horses, Royce. And it made me wonder, is that foreshadowing for Jaime? Remember I said this to you before with the prologue. Are we going to see Royce come back, Royce the White? And I wonder, will Jaime end up having some sort of battle with that white Royce? And will he end up having to unhorse that Royce as well later? That's, yeah. But what about you with this chapter?
Sorry, Sansa chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I'm just making sure that there's still some shepherd's pie for me later. It's not all eaten. Yeah, I thought that Sansa is strangely, seems very composed inwardly. I think she knows how she's supposed to react, and I think the Hound has got the measure of her when he says "little bird." He can see through the fact that she's acting out everything that's expected of her, but internally, inside, Sansa seems very composed with all the horror really that's going on around her. And you know, that if you contrast that with her friend Jane, who's so overwhelmed that she has to be taken off and, you know, put down and, like, you know, lie in a darkened room till she composes herself again. Sansa seems to be taking it all in a stride, and she seems kind of fascinated a little bit strangely with the death. Like when the horse's head, and it just that kind of took me back a little bit, because at this point I thought that Sansa was just very, very girly. But there's something there internally that's got this kind of true sort of this northern grit about Sansa.
But only when it fits her narrative about what a knight should be. It's not like when she has to face like the truth, and when it's kind of ugly, she finds that difficult.
Yeah. Yeah.
When the Hound makes her face the truth, like of his scars and all that kind of thing, that's when she goes, oh, this doesn't fit the narrative.
Yeah. I think she's, but I still think that there's this composure within her that if something really horrific happened to her, she would be able to deal with it. I think she is as strong as Arya, but just in a very different way. And I mean, it's both it's internal with both of them, but you can see it there. She what have I got here? Yeah, she very quickly blames the Queen and Arya and not Joffrey, so she gets kind of again caught into it and drunk on the atmosphere of everything that's going on at the tourney. But the big thing really for me was the interaction between Sansa and the Hound in this chapter. It did feel, and I know I've probably heard years and years and years of LaDonna and LaDonna's theories about the Hound and Sansa, and I'm not traditionally a kind of San shipper, but it did feel like he was walking her home at the end of a date. It just did. It just felt, that's kind of how it felt. This kind of
unlucky match on Tinder, I'd say.
Yeah.
or Cinder, because the face.
But she, I mean, she disarms him straight away. Just as, you know, he immediately tells her why he looks the way he does, almost as an excuse maybe of, like, you know, perhaps I'd be handsome if this didn't happen to me. There is this kind of torrid, intense something there between both of them, even on this first like exchange between them. He didn't, to me, he didn't seem to want to scare her. It was like he wanted to just toughen her up.
Yeah.
And I felt that, again, as much as he didn't seem to want to scare her, she also didn't seem that scared of him. She seemed sort of more sorry for him. I don't quite understand why the Hound felt the need to confess to Sansa, and then, you know, obviously he immediately regrets it, and says, I'll kill you if you tell anybody about it. And then in the next chapter that you get with Sansa, this is why I think it's quite interesting to read them in sequence, but the next chapter that you get with Sansa, she seems quite excited about the Hound and to see that. Now, that's unusual for somebody who's just threatened to kill you. You know, that's like, so there's something really
It's
odd
kind of like
there.
Tyrion with Jon.
Yes,
In a way,
yeah.
you know, you've got the people that maybe shouldn't be friends, Lannister and a Stark, or Lannister and a Targ, that like they're showing each other the truth about like human experience from a different angle. I mean, I think the Hound is trying to prep her for the kinds of life she's going to have with Joffrey, that she has to look beyond the exterior and see what's going on inside.
Yeah.
I mean, she's this made up idea about knights, and you know when she says about Sir Gregor, and he's saying, you know, oh, he's anointed. You know, he was anointed shortly after torturing a young boy, and this is what happened. And it's interesting as well that it is this chapter, right? Or is it Ed's chapter? I think it's this chapter where describing the fight with the Hound and Gregor's face is unprotected, and the Hound never goes for the face. I think that's her, right? That she notices that he doesn't go for the. And it's also interesting in this chapter. Or is it in this chapter? Maybe I'm jumping ahead of myself. Oh yeah, no, that Littlefinger creeps on Sansa in this chapter.
Yeah, like touching her hair and stuff. Weirdo.
So weird. But yeah, no, I didn't have anything else on that now, because it was just, I think it is mostly important for people shipping the Hound and Sansa.
Yeah.
And for like that idea that Sansa just judges everything by the book, the cover. You know?
Yeah, but I mean, for me, I just made a note that she seems, there's something about Sansa here that just makes her seem a little bit tougher than maybe I remembered her being at this stage in previous rereads.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we have Ed, and this chapter leads in with the death of Jon Arryn's squire, and how he was very conveniently killed by Gregor, right?
Yeah.
And he wonders if he'll ever get an answer as to whether that was on purpose. And it seems to me that the cost of this tourney is very high.
Yeah.
That it's not just the financial cost, the social unrest, but also there is a taking of Sansa's innocence here in a way, but also just the fact that he's losing out on the information.
He seems like Ned later on in this chapter seems visibly like relaxed and happy that it's all over, it's finished, because this is like the end of the tourney, isn't it? This is like the final day.
Yeah. And there's only 4 knights left, right? Gregor, the Hound, Jaime, and Loras.
Yeah.
And I know there's like a lot of theories around who's left standing at the end, and who on horses who, and all that kind of thing. The thing in this chapter that stood out to me is the conversation with Robert, and also the conversation with Littlefinger. That Robert says to Ed that he should have been king, or Jon, but you know, not. It's two things. Obviously, people go, oh, that could be an allusion to or reference to Jon Snow. It made me think, if he thought that Jon Arryn could be king, that kind of suggests to me an ambition on Jon Arryn that we overlook because we don't know who he is and we don't really get that much about him. But he's clearly very ambitious, Jon Arryn. If Robert even considered that he could be king, if he could have made that claim, there's a sense there that maybe because we know Ned could have, because he was in the throne room, and even Cersei will tell Ned later on, you should have took the throne for yourself. But in what position did Jon have himself in that he could ever claim that throne? And it also just kind of helped. I don't know. My suspicions of Jon Arryn, kind of, and Stannis's plot. I think there's a lot more to it there, but we may never know anything about that. But I think there was something going on with those two.
Well, I mean, I suppose we've got to remember as well that Ned and Ned and Robert would have seen Aaron as this father figure.
Mm-hmm.
You know, effectively for Robert particularly, he was like a surrogate father because he lost his father at an early age. So was that before he was fostered, I wonder? It must have been.
Sorry, that Robert lost his father.
Yeah,
I think so.
It must have been. So he would have put all of that onto Jon Arryn, you know, as a father figure. But yeah, there's very little that we know about Jon Arryn.
Very little. Also, where did Stannis and Renly go when the parents died? So Stannis, maybe Robert went before they died, because Stannis saw. Oh no, they were all there when the ship went down, right?
Yeah, they were.
I wonder, where did Stannis and Renly go? They hardly stayed. Anyway, sorry, I'm going off topic.
Yeah, no. It's an interesting question though. I mean, in the Ned chapter here, we've got it just seemed to be going on and on and on, this chapter. It was a very very long chapter. So we've got the end of the tourney, we've got at the very end of the chapter, Varys visiting Ned in disguise. It's referenced, I've mentioned about Ned saying he's not sleeping well, and that's cropped up a few times now, where he's talking about being tired and not sleeping well. In the King's Pavilion, when Ned says to Robert that you never knew the real Lyanna, again, you know, alluding to, you know, you have this childhood memory of her, but you didn't know her. And that it's Barristan that talks Robert out of the melee. What have I put here? Yeah, about Jon Arryn, and he's going back to what I was saying before about this. It's almost like this Illuminati of fathers. So you've got Jon Arryn, Tywin, Hoster. I can never remember the name of Ned's father. But there's
Rickon. Is it Rickon?
Yeah, Rickon. Yeah. There's a group of like 5 or 6 men of a certain age, of which Jon Arryn would be part of that. And he's the one that talks Robert into marrying Cersei.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
To bind him to Tywin. So there's this. It does feel like a bit of an Illuminati, this layer of... They're
all playing chess with one another.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I mean, I suppose this is like the OG Game of Thrones, but it was a different generation. Oops, sorry, I'm just trying to get my notebook that's fallen down here. And interesting that Robert himself has reservations about Joffrey's ability. Do you think he had a clue at all?
Yeah, I mean, for me, he almost lays out the whole idea. He says that Cersei basically doesn't let him sleep with her. Yeah. Which, to me, it kind of shows, okay, Robert at least doesn't force himself on Cersei. At least, like, you know, most men at this time, they probably would, right?
There's a different description of that from Cersei much later on in the book series.
But Cersei seems to think that she's pulling one over on him. But he's well aware that he's not sleeping with her fully.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, like, he's well aware that she's just kind of she's doing other stuff, but he's not actually having full sex with her. So yeah. She thinks he's too drunk to tell the difference, but he knows. And you're right. He's like, how could I give birth to a son like that? And yeah, I think maybe deep down he knows.
Why doesn't Ned mention to Robert that he's seen Gendry and that he knows who he is?
Good question.
Why did he keep that from him?
There's no
threat
there to do that.
No. And it could have just been an observation. I mean, they've talked before about who was your bastard's mother again.
Why didn't Jon Arryn say anything? Like, I mean, it's not like everybody knows about Robert's bastards. Like, they all know that he's got loads of bastards. He's owned up to one of them or two of them in the book. But yeah, it makes me question Jon Arryn a little bit again. Also, Jon Arryn married Lysa when he was quite old. And he married her. Was she already? Oh no, she'd already gotten pregnant and all that kind of thing with Littlefinger's kid, right? We find out later. I do buy into the idea that Robert Arryn isn't Jon Arryn's. And I wonder, did he kind of know that himself? Maybe. But yeah, it's strange. Like, he knows that he isn't sleeping with her, so yeah. I don't know. It seems very obvious when he says it there. Like, it seems very obvious.
I mean, the thing is, with all of this, in the absence of, like, DNA testing, it doesn't, even if you've figured out that you and your wife, the child that you've got isn't yours, nobody's going to ever be able to prove it. I mean, it might be a kind of personal injustice to yourself, but in that position, I guess,
it makes me wonder, would he have? I'm sure he would have cared, but yeah, I don't know. To me, I wonder, does Robert have, like, very severe depression? The way he behaves. But Cedric says that Stannis and Renly stayed at Storm's End under the tutelage of the Master that later tries to poison Melisandre. Brilliant, thank you. The Queen of Thorns and one of the Martells are included in the Illuminati, definitely. And he says, no, Robert thinks he only gets to sleep with her 3 times a year. In reality, he gets to fuck her once by force, and Cersei, he knows but chooses not to tell Eddard. No, he doesn't, not by force. The problem with that for Cersei is that he calls out Lyanna's name, but it isn't rape, right? He doesn't rape her. When Cersei later on says, am I right, Claire?
I'm not so sure about that.
I thought it was, she was okay with him sleeping with her. I could be misremembering it. We'll get to it anyway, but I could be misremembering it. Okay, so all right, so we are, yeah, that's the end of Ed 7 then. Do you have anything else?
But I've actually got loads of notes on this. Sorry, we're just doing dog to making sure he goes out. Come on.
Oh, the only other thing I had here was with Littlefinger when he bets on Jaime. So Ed is aware that he's betting on Jaime again in this tourney, and if he's betting on Jaime, but he lost the last time he's betting on Jaime, that should be a big red flag to Ed that he's lying. Why would you bet? Sorry, the last time he betted in favor of Jaime, he lost. Why would he bet in favor of Jaime again? Because Sansa says that I knew the Hound would win, and Littlefinger, kind of, makes it note that he's lost money on Jaime. But he lost the dagger before, and then we find out in the next chapter that Tyrion never bets against his family. So, Ed, like, it tells the reader that this is a lie. But it should instantly tell Ed that there's something wrong, because Ed knows that story, right? That's how the dagger ended up with Tyrion, apparently, that Littlefinger lost it. So that's a big, he's not a very good detective. Because when I first saw that, I was like, well, obviously he's lying then. There's no way, if you lost money on Jaime before, there's no way, especially when he's going up against the Hound, that you're going to bet against the Hound, right? Or am I missing something there? But I feel like Littlefinger, it's a clue to us that Littlefinger maybe isn't as smart as, or maybe isn't as careful as we think he is, especially around Sansa. And he's going to underestimate Sansa later on.
Yeah.
And also, Ned remarks that Sansa dreams and Arya bruises. Like that seems to be, Sansa has her dreams and Arya has her bruises, which is important also later on. And Varys tells Ned the truth about the people around Robert, that Robert doesn't have any friends and that Ned is his only friend. And Ned says, we need to tell Robert. And like Varys kind of suggests that, what's the point? Like,
yeah,
you know, the last hand got in trouble for asking questions, and you're asking too many questions. You need to get out of here. Cersei says, according to Cedric and Fisa Crows, Cersei tells Robert also rapes her sometimes, but she's too ashamed about that and wants to show a brave face, so doesn't tell Eddard that. She only says it in an inner monologue, I think. Yeah, I can't remember it all, Cedric. You're probably totally right. I can't really remember.
I do remember reading something that was kind of like, wolf, he sounds really brutal. I mean, the way she's describing it is, to me, it sounds like he was pretty rough.
Okay, yeah, I completely, I need to definitely Cersei read.
But it's much later on, like way later on, like Feast for Crows. It's way down the line when there is this inner monologue with Cersei.
Okay. So what else did you have for?
So I've got again Sansa and the Hound. So her being interested in the Hound, what he's doing, what's going on, like asking, is the Hound the champion now, and gasping when and being teary-eyed and saying, I knew the Hound would win. So she seems interested in what's going on with the Hound, despite the fact that he threatened to kill her the last conversation that they had. So there does seem something kind of intense going on there. That I was just wondering who the Mountain was due to marry, because it said he had 2 wives. And this mystery about 2 wives and servants and this younger sister that disappeared. And he was just about to marry the 3rd one. And it just makes me wonder who that was, if we ever get to find out, because I can't remember. And yeah, just the Angai, there was somebody called Angai who won the archery at the tourney, described as somebody from the Dornish Marches. Is that the same guy who's in like the Brotherhood later on? Not the Brotherhood. Is it the Brotherhood?
The Brotherhood Banners.
Yeah, who end up with Lady Stoneheart. Yeah, I think that's who it is.
Oh, right, like, okay. So
this
he must
guy
be
who
there, because Beric is mentioned
archery
on Toros as well in this chapter, right?
Yes, yeah. So they are, there are a few of them that are mentioned there. Again, interesting that Ned has the blade, has the dagger, and he's wondering about things being linked together, and he's at all of these different elements that seem to be linked together, but he still can't figure out some of the basic stuff. Varys and his intentions and his motivations, he proclaims Robert as a fool, and there was people are trying to kill him, and this is what's happening, and this is what's going on, and it's like Varys needs to know whether or not Ned is loyal to the realm or loyal to just himself, his own vanity. So it kind of makes us feel as the reader that Varys is a kind of ambivalent sort of character. He's not necessarily as nasty and slimy as evil as Littlefinger. He's got some loyalty there, and he wants to find out whether or not people are loyal to the realm or not. But again, that could be for nefarious reasons. He seems to completely shit on the Kingsguard as well, about how inept they are and how they wouldn't be protecting anyone. They're useless. The only one that seems to be of any value is Barristan, which is what I was saying before, is the opposite about what Littlefinger saying, oh, Barristan's this, that, and the other and needs to go. And as Cedric said, this stupidity. And yeah, I think that's it. It was massive. There was lots and lots of like detail in this chapter. Yeah, it did. I've just made a note here that it's a long chapter. It does seem to have gone on for a long time
so far.
Yeah. Well, it definitely felt like it to me. Yeah.
Yeah, and just with the Varys thing as well. I mean, Pycelle is obviously against Varys back at the beginning of the Ed 5 chapter, and you know there are clues there that Varys that we pick up on later as we get to know Varys a bit more. You know, it's not really a surprise that Pycelle and Varys don't get on, because Pycelle is very well. He's symbol for the religion. The maesters in it's a religion as well, kind of. And so Varys is very against that kind of thinking, but also very against people being out for themselves. And so we get a lot of Littlefinger loves Littlefinger throughout these chapters as well. So yeah. So that was a big chapter, and then we move on to Tyrion 4, who is on his way to the Vale, and they're attacked by some clansmen who sound a little bit like the Dothraki that get mentioned at the beginning of the Tyrion chapter, which kind of reminds you, well, where the hell are the Dothraki? Why are we still in Westeros? Can we go back to Dany for a little bit? Even though Dany chapters, they still feel so out of place in a Game of Thrones. I don't really feel like they ever feel like they're part of this book necessarily. And I think throughout the series, it feels like Dany is very detached from the story. But he does mention here that Dothraki customs had scant appeal to him, which I thought maybe is that foreshadowing potentially him being with the Dothraki at some stage, or turning against the Dothraki at some stage. So yeah, and he says that anger is fed by cat scars. Like as people are arresting him, he describes how they were arresting them and they were looking at cat's scars, and that fed the anger in the room, which again, more Lady Stoneheart foreshadowing. And I already mentioned how he just picks apart that misplaced trust she has in Littlefinger, and the phrase, he picks it apart almost entirely straight away. And we learn that Littlefinger has been telling people, oh, hi, Lisa. We learn that Littlefinger has been telling people that he took Kat's virginity. Whether Tyrion is telling the truth on that or not, I don't know. But we don't, like, Kat instantly denies it, but we don't necessarily know if her denial is truth. I mean, later on we get the story that he slept with Lysa, and Lysa thought that he knew he was sleeping with her, but he thought that he was sleeping with Kat. But I've always wondered that maybe he did sleep with Kat. You know, that maybe there was like some experimenting going on, like young people do sometimes. Yeah, just that he also again reminds us what Varys reminds us, that Littlefinger loves Littlefinger, and again he notices that as the clansmen attack and he's fighting, he feels no pain. And this kind of ties in really nicely with Arya in the next chapter, who's kind of instantly going through the water dancing motions as if it's very natural to her. So there's very much a survival instinct thread between these two chapters. We also see that the clansmen are starving, suggesting that the effects of seasonal change are already taking effect in the Vale, in and around the Vale. And you just know with Tyrion that he notices things like that, whereas Kat doesn't. And I meant to mention that with the Kat chapter, when she's not offered any smiles or sweet cakes, simply because she's just seen as a normal person. Like the way people of the upper classes and upper middle classes get treated compared to everybody else is very, very different. But Tyrion notices that these guys are near starving. And and he tells us at the end that he never bets against his family. So it's pretty obvious that Littlefinger is lying. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, there's a couple of Lady Stoneheart things as well that I've got in it. There's a lot more about what I've picked up about Kat in this chapter than Tyrion necessarily. Although I think it's, you know, it gives us a bit more of an idea about his character, how he's immediately calculating the odds of his escape and how word will get to his father. And he seems quite confident in his status as a Lannister, you know, and previously when they were in the inn, he was kind of flexing his gold and things like that. Just questions again about Cat for me. Why did she let the singer come along? It just seems a bit silly to, again, this vanity and this link to the South. Seems a bit silly to have somebody there with her who can broadcast all the secrets when she was doing this cloak and dagger act in King's Landing. It just seems a bit weird to me. That particular singer, Marillion, was described later on as a spider scrabbling around like a spider, which makes me think, was Marillion there as a spy for Varys or Littlefinger? You know, he just seemed to kind of suddenly be there at the inn, claiming to be on his way down to King's Landing. But it was just, I can't remember who it was, but somebody described him, it must have been Tyrion, as scrabbling around in the dirt like a spider after the battle that they have. And
he also says later on, Craven rhymes with Raven, which suggests information.
Yeah. Cat just being naive about things like, why would Peter lie to me? Oh, Cat, come on. You know, it's just, she's been as naive as Ned is in King's Landing. And I've said, what we've mentioned before about Tyrion saying that Littlefinger tells everybody in King's Landing that he took Cat's Maidenhead, and I've said somebody probably did, but I don't think it was Ned or Littlefinger. So I potentially could have been Brandon. And at the end of this chapter, when they're talking about not having time to bury the dead, and I just think that is like, not burying the dead is bad luck. Is this foreshadowing for like this kind of undead spirit that's you know, Lady Stoneheart? And then just again a note about earlier on in the chapter saying that we're taking him back to Winterfell often and loudly, that she proclaims this often and loudly, and that is, you know, a metaphor for George R.R. Martin proclaiming things loudly and often to the reader, to then, you know, do the quick kind of like switcheroo and actually the truth is somewhere else. So yeah, that's really.
Do you think at this point, if Tyrion had been able to convince her, listen, this is ridiculous. Look, listen to me. Why would I bet against Jaime? Littlefinger's pulling a fast one here. He's playing you like a fiddle. I know you hate the Lannisters, but I haven't done anything. Do you think Tyrion would have negotiated a truce at that stage?
I think she's possibly. I think she seems quite trusting of Tyrion, and she definitely seems to be rethinking her stance on his guilt quite easily. So
again, this has a lot. The biggest problem here is nobody has talked to Lysa yet, and talking to Lysa before now would have rang the alarm that Lysa isn't right. She's not right mentally at all. So Ned hasn't been talking to her, and now Cat hasn't been talking to her, and you're basically, you know, she may have been able to check her mistake up to this point, but again, maybe somebody's whispering to Lysa apart from Littlefinger. She's sitting in that weirwood throne, you know, maybe something's not right with Lysa as well. But Cedric says that the clansmen might be starving because the land is barely exploited. There has been a big court culture with a lot of people in the Eyrie, but it has been deserted for years. Agriculture maybe is that. But yeah, possibly, for sure. The neglect is described thoroughly wouldn't mean fewer travelers, fewer markets, less life to live on for 20 odd years. It also suggests that Jon Arryn has turned his attention away from that part of the world, and so has Lysa, and that there's they have other plans. They're preoccupied with other things. That, yeah. So that's definitely, it's not just seasonal. There's definitely like neglect there, leadership and otherwise. But yeah, so that's Tyrion 4. And then we're on to our last chapter, which is chapter 32, which is Arya. And yeah, so what did you think about Arya's chapter?
I think that this is a very typical Arya is alone in the dark chapter, but we're learning that she is easily beginning to very quickly learn fast that she can conquer. She might be frightened, but that she can conquer that fear. And there seems to be lots of kind of potential warging type activities going on in this chapter. So I'm wondering about the cat. So I'm wondering who the old Tom cat is. Later on, when she's down in the dungeons, there seems to be something down there with her. She feels that there's something down there with her, and I'm like, is that the cat? Is it the fact that there are dragon bones everywhere? Maybe that's giving off some kind of vibes. There seem to be some kind of like awakening of wargish abilities there, I think, with Arya in this chapter. Just the description of her being down in the dungeons. When Marcella and Tommen mistake her for a boy, I've just put here royalty mistaking Arya for a boy, and Arya's been likened to Lyanna a lot in the past. I wonder if Lyanna was ever disguised as a boy to slip past royalty, you know. And of course we have like the Night of the Laughing Tree as an example, but several times already Arya is referred to as a boy in this chapter, by several different sources, and it just made me wonder if Lyanna was ever in disguise beyond what we think is the Night of the Laughing Tree. The men that were down in the crypt, so obviously the conversation here is that they know, we presume that these characters are Illyrio, from the description from Arya's again point of view, Illyrio and Varys, and they're talking about knowing that Ned has found Gendry, but they also wonder whether or not Ned's going to discover more bastards. Now I've said, is Gendry trueborn, and by will he discover other bastards? By that, do they mean Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen? So yeah, I mean, outwardly it sounds like, oh, he's found Gendry, the king's bastard. I wonder if he'll find any more bastards, you know, all the ones that are in the brothels and elsewhere. But actually, you could interpret that as he's found the bastard, and will he find more? And also Arya referring to the bastard in this context, in this conversation, potentially being Jon. So there's several ways that you can interpret what you're hearing from this conversation. Plus, you've got to remember that it's into the ears of like an 8-year-old Arya. So it's kind of like coded and then coded again. So they're talking about the wolf and the lion and too soon, and that they're not ready. They're discussing how to get rid of the hand, and how it's no longer just a war between two factions like the lion and the wolf. There are now other factions like Stannis, Renly, Littlefinger. Two more things that I pointed out in this is that if it is Varys, the other guy who was talking to Varys refers to him twice as being a sorcerer, and one of them as being, you are a true sorcerer. And Varys is supposed to hate magic. So that was interesting.
Yeah.
And just to note at the end of the chapter that it's obviously Yoren is telling Ned about Cat and Tyrion, that Cat's captured Tyrion. So that's what we get at the very end of the chapter. But yeah, I think just what's come out of this chapter really for me is this notion of Arya being alone in the dark, but being able to conquer her fear. Whether or not there's an awakening of some wargish abilities, and the several different ways that you can interpret that conversation between the two men that she overhears down in the dungeons. But that's it really for me.
Yeah, I leading on from the Tyrion chapter, it might be strange to go to the Arya chapter, but one of the first things she says that catching cats was hard, and it's talking maybe about Cat having the Lannister line in custody. It's not easy, but also maybe it's foreshadowing that, you know, obviously she'll have her list later. There will be a Lannister on that list, a couple of Lannisters on that list. But maybe it's also referring to Cat herself. Maybe Arya will have to catch Lady Stoneheart at some stage. Maybe that will become hard, you know. And I did. I when she spies on this conversation, she's not entirely sure what's going on, and I wonder, will she ever put that together? I wonder, will there come a point where she will put that information in context? I'm not sure, or whether she'll be at a certain time in a place where she'll be able to enlighten somebody on, you know, Vagon or potentially Vagon or whatever it is. I just, that's what made me think of that. Interesting, Varys's need for 50 birds, and that, you know, get them a bit older or ones that don't die. Like, what exactly do these birds have to do? What positions are these birds in? It's really dark. It's really dark shit that's just very quickly referenced to. And we get a sense that Varys, oh yeah, he's working for the people, but really, like, he's sacrificing all these little kids to his spy network constantly, and cutting out their tongues, which made me think of Euron. And we all think Euron is a monster. Hi, Marwyn. Hi, Marwyn. But yeah, we all think Euron is a monster, but we forget that Varys is really dark. Like, that is dark. Like, he was used, as you said, he was used by a sorcerer for magic, and yet, like, he uses all these kids for his own magic, and maybe practical magic, but it's still magic. Cedric says, what about Illyrio? Isn't he morbidly a beast? Could he travel that much and walk so far? It's a good question. I mean, how did he get there? I mean, obviously, this is well after he had plenty of time to get there, because this is well after, long time after Dany's wedding. This is months and months after Dany's wedding. So yeah, it's a good question. Clearly, there's ways and means of getting them there. There's also foreshadowing from for the Mercy chapter, because Ned tells her that the conversation about the wolf and the lion, it's a mummer's farce and all that kind of thing, and that it's to do with acting troops. So it's foreshadowing the Mercy chapter, which is really nice, I thought. And the monsters and the wizards, that the conversation about monsters and wizards, and Ned completely rejects it straight away, which is very unlike Jon, who doesn't reject that kind of stuff when he hears it. But it just made me think, well, that's kind of, you know, the monsters are the dragons potentially, and the wizards are, you know, all the tricks and all that thing that's going to be played. And if he'd listened to her, I'm not sure he could have done anything with the information anyway, because they're actually pointing out the stuff that he's already missing in this conversation. So I'm not so sure, that he could have done anything with her. But that's all I had. There's a lot of foreshadowing in this chapter, I feel, for who Arya is going to become. And obviously, it you know, the payoff to the mystery of this conversation we're still guessing at, but for the most part we believe we have some sort of answer as to what this is all about later on. The darkness of the 50 birds, though, that's where the hell are they getting these kids? How easy is it to just pick up kids?
It's scary.
Yeah,
very scary.
Yeah. So yeah, but that's all I have for this chapter and this section of our discussion. If anyone has any questions, you can leave them in the comments, or if you're in the chat, you can ask them right now. For next week, we're reading all the way from Eddard 8 to Eddard 10, which is chapter 33 to chapter 39, which actually brings us to exactly halfway through the book. So I was a bit ahead of myself. So we're definitely halfway through by the end of the next chapter, a little bit over halfway through. And yeah, another 3 Ed chapters in only 6. So half of our conversation next week will be Ed. So he's really ramping up our Ed time. Because Ed disappears for a while then.
Yeah.
Towards the end, but yeah, so we're getting a lot of Ed next week. But yeah, so that's it for me. Do you have anything you want to add, Claire?
No, just that when I was listening to the Arya chapter earlier, I didn't have a chance to stop I didn't have a chance to stop the recording when the chapter ended, and it went straight into the next chapter, which is an Ed chapter, and it's just bam, straight into things.
Well, I deliberately added Arya to this section. It would have made more sense to put Arya with the next section because there's so much. We've done 8 chapters this week. But I deliberately did that because I assume we're going to spend a long time talking about that first chapter next week. And if anyone doesn't know what that first chapter is, it is the Tower of Joy chapter. So it's one of my favorite chapters, probably my favorite chapter from this book, but one of the best written chapters, I think, in the series. So yeah,
looking forward
to that. Yes, so thanks so much, Claire, and thanks to everybody for joining us, Lisa and Cedric in the chat, and everybody who's watching later on. Thank you so much. And get involved, ask us questions. If you have any questions that you want to ask for next week but you can't join us in the chat, just leave them in this video and I'll find them and I can add them to next week's discussion. Thank you so much, Claire, and thanks to everybody. Enjoy your week and have a great Halloween, by the way, everybody. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.